I've been thinking, what is the reason that we do things in life? I know that's a very broad sort of topic, but I'm reminded of my time in high school band when I was playing a song called The Witch and the Saint by Stephen Reinecke, and sitting next to a fantastic musician for the high school level, of course, but also just beyond. I don't know what he's doing now, but I assume and I hope that he is still playing music because he was just fantastic. Um, when he plays that solo right at the very beginning on the French horn, as of course I am a French horn player as well, that fits my aesthetic, does it not? It's my personality. A lot of times people talk about the sort of instrument that you play as being indicative of your personality. And I think that, the French horn tends to have that sort of air of sophistication about it that I think is actually quite apt for myself. But to not digress too much longer, that solo just gives me goosebumps when I hear it. And especially if I transport myself back to the time at which my fellow French horn player to my left, Yes, to my left, playing that gives me goosebumps. But even greater than that, if you go to the end of the piece, a round measure, was it 217, 218, somewhere in that ballpark, close to like a Adamant Tyranitar 252 speed stat. There's this sort of unison part in the band where it's got these really, really powerful chords, playing in threes with a little breath in between, a rest of similar sort of note value. For those of you who are not as familiar with music, rests are also a very powerful indicator of the sort of tone you're going for, and being able to just unleash the sound on three beats with one singular beat of introspection in between, like, that just gets me as well. And to be able to give yourself goosebumps while you're playing is really the sort of high that I try to achieve every day in my life. Some days more successful than others. And it does scratch a little itch for me. One of the things that I always wanted to play was Night on Bald Mountain by Modest Mussorgsky. I'm not as Russian as you might believe that I am. So forgive me if I'm having trouble pronouncing that name, but Modest first name. What an apt and coincidental comparison there to Pokemon, of course, the modest nature. But you may not know the name Night on Bald Mountain. It's a strange sort of title for a piece of music, but if you look it up, I'm sure you'll recognize it. And that sort of powerful chord at the beginning where you can really let the horn rattle. And well, you don't necessarily want to let it rattle too much because that spreads the sound, and it can sound a little bit like, how do you want to say, aggressive for the sort of timbre that you're trying to achieve with the French horn, as well as many other instruments. So maybe don't get so uncontained in your playing, but the composition for Night on Bald Mountain really, really allows for that such thing, and I really wish I could have gotten to play that, but The Witch and the Saint is as good a proxy as I have had, which is fine with me. But now that we've discussed that, let's talk about the topic for the video. What if Ironhead was in ADV? And I'll have some accompanying replays from some tournament games from DPP, as a sort of visual accompaniment, there you go, musical term, to this sort of discussion. So, as we know in ADV, some of the most common threats in the game are Tyranitar, to some extent things like Salamence and Metagross and Aerodactyl, as far as physical threats go, all exist as well. And Ironhead is actually quite a good move at hitting 3 out of 4 of those. Well, Aerodactyl may be to some lesser extents because it is, well, faster than pretty much any of the Pokemon that could be running Ironhead. Speaking of, there's Jirachi getting a flinch on the Blissey here. Should it go for another one? Yes, it does. Gets a critical hit on the Magnezone. Interesting. But rather than bog down in the discussion here as another flinch comes down onto this Magnezone, who is trapping the Jirachi. Jirachi cannot switch out here, but it is getting many, many flinches. I wonder if you would go for a U-turn here as X-Cal with his Jirachi. Probably not. You might be choice locked into your Ironhead here. Nevertheless, Ironhead is going to be good coverage, especially as a stab move for Jirachi into hitting Tyranitar and Aerodactyl, who are two Pokemon that tend to take a hit from Jirachi, in the case of Tyranitar, many hits from Jirachi, and threaten massive damage with Earthquake. So Jirachi is not a Pokemon that generally beats those. Now there are some sets that can, such as Hidden Power Fighting, such as Dynamic Punch, although Dynamic Punch is very inconsistent with its only 50% accuracy. Funny enough, 100% confusion chance doubled by Serene Grace, so it's got a 200% confusion chance. Not that that means anything, really, but just thought I'd want to mention it here, as this Jirachi is still yet to fail to hit an Ironhead flinch on this Magnezone. Alright, there we go. Finally on turn 15. Something for the Magnezone to break through there, but back in the spin cycle, as it were, just like a washing machine. Speaking of which, let me go grab my washing real quick. It was still a bit damp, so I decided to run another cycle in the dryer. Oh, it looks like a death threat did not want to continue after the Ironhead Jirachi so thoroughly shellacked the Magnezone here. Only 6 Ironheads left. There's still probably some potential to play through this, but I suppose that if there's a Skarmory or some other high-value target to trap with Magnezone in the back for X-Cal, that it might be very difficult to play this out, but I think you should still play this out regardless. Where was I at before I took a break there? Oh, yeah, so Tyranitar, not so much a counter to Jirachi, if it has such a consistent move to click into the Tyranitar, such as Ironhead. Many ADV Tyranitar like to run particularly slower on their speed investment, so not quite 252 speed. In such cases, when they go for Dragon Dance and they get to +1, They may not actually be faster than a max speed Jirachi, which would be a very high value thing to do in ADV if you had Iron Head as an option. Being able to outspeed everything to get your flinches off could be really, really important for many matchups. Let's go ahead and get another game going here. Oh, look who it is. Claydol, interesting. You don't see Claydol too commonly in DPP, but Ray Scarface, fantastic gamer. Very innovative with his sort of team choices here. Spore, oh man. Do you remember the time when sleep was allowed in DPP? I remember it like it was yesterday. Probably because the last time I played DPP, excuse me, was when sleep was allowed. So to me, it's always been there. But yes, being able to two-shot many Tyranitar with your Ironhead Jirachi, as well as avoid a one-shot back from most Tyranitar Earthquake or Fire Blast. Of course, mixed Tyranitar, very underrated threat, very valuable. Probably should make a video about such a thing. It's a sort of dynamic flipper that would shake the very notion of matchups in ADV. Additionally to that, there are some other Pokemon that sometimes act as checks to Jirachi and ADV that would struggle to do so, such as Blissey. Now, Blissey's not always a super duper invaluable, or should I say consistent check to Jirachi. There are some Jirachi sets that just completely wall and manage to beat some Blissey sets, such as this Clefable beating this Breloom, whose only fighting move is Focus Punch, I believe. Or does it even have Focus Punch? No, it does not. Completely walled. Interesting. See how that works there? It's like cinema. In any case, let's think about the Blissey matchup here, right? So Sub and Wish CM Jirachi sometimes get the better of Blissey. Sub maybe less often. It depends on what your coverage is. Psychic is a little bit more likely because of the Spadef drops, but Thunderbolt and Ice Punch are also moves that can sometimes manage to beat the Blissey, depending on whether their secondary effects go off. But when you have a 60% chance to get a flinch to stop Blissey from being able to do things such as soft-boiled up, such as break your substitute, then you have a lot of room to just completely destroy the Blissey matchup. And Blissey, of course, is a Pokemon that would sometimes need to be the answer to Jirachi in the case that, say, the Jirachi is a special attacker and Blissey, of course, is your special wall. You need to be able to come in those cases. There are some other Pokemon that would have some issues, of course. Magneton, as we see on screen here, is a Pokemon that would ×4 resist Iron Head. So it could live a few Iron Heads and be able to throw off something like a Thunder Wave or get some damage with Thunderbolt. But Jirachi, of course, has plenty of coverage options, namely Fire Punch, in order to beat down a Magneton. So say if you had a defensive Jirachi set, like, for example, your Body Slam Fire Punch Jirachi, which is a great set, by the way. I've won many tournament games with that very set. If you, say, swap one of the moves, in particular Body Slam for Iron Head, then you simply have to get a few flinches to put the Magneton into range for a Fire Punch. Magneton, of course, does not tend to run leftovers in ADV. It needs that magnet in order to secure KOs onto Skarmory. What a great Pokemon, by the way. You get a lot of value out of that. I'm starting to think maybe Skarmory might be the best Pokemon in ADV. Think about how much the spikes bolster the effect of Sandstorm, and how much defensive utility you get out of Skarmory as well. Let's be. It would be remiss not to mention such a thing. But yeah, Jirachi, it doesn't have very many counters in ADV, such as like Heatran here. Heatran is a Pokemon that would ×4 resist Steel, of course. So Iron Head is going to be doing, as you see there, about 8%, even through Paralysis and the 60% Flinch chance. Even if we get all 24 of them, Leftovers is going to undo most of the progress there. We're going to end up a net. Let me use my mathematic mind here. 24 times 2, you would do about 48%. Not even half to Heatran before you would run out of Iron Heads. So it's kind of not worth it to stay in and slam into a Heatran such as that. But there are not very many Pokemon who have that sort of quality in ADV. Some of the checks that we see in DPP to an Iron Head Jirachi that do exist in ADV would be like a defensive Swampert, or to lesser extent Skarmory. Skarmory's a little bit tough because Jirachi can so easily carry things like Thunder or Thunderbolt or Fire Punch, even on its physical sets, that can do a lot of damage to your Skarmory. And Skarmory oftentimes is needed to check other threats in the tier, so it can sometimes be grating to have to contend with Jirachi, who is so likely to get really, really valuable secondary effects onto your Skarmory, such as Burn, such as the Flinches, such as Paralysis, that it's not always going to want to be the first choice. But yes, Swampert, who is Spike's weak, of course, and Spike's being such a huge part of the ADV metagame, it's not going to be so difficult to chip a Swampert down into range where Jirachi only needs to hit 1 or 2 flinches to put it into, say, like HP grass range and eliminate it in that way. I think who else would be a Pokemon that could maybe handle Jirachi? Defensive Suicune, to a degree, could. But defensive Suicune is exploitable in other ways, such as relying on mono surf coverage. You could run a water absorbed Pokemon such as Vaporeon, which is one of my favorite Pokemon to use in the ADV tier. In fact, I think it might be one of the best UUBLs, perhaps number 2 behind, of course, Registeel. Raikou, of course, is a fantastic Pokemon. It does great in offense teams that need the matchup division into certain teams that are relying on, say, like a defensive water to handle the mixed attackers / physical attackers on your team. That's why you've probably heard of this team archetype Slop in ADV that has risen to prominence thanks to the efforts of a fantastic gamer named Fredazi. Raikou prominently features on that particular team, and I have to give a big shout out to all the other gamers who are trying to push that archetype to further extents here, as that Breloom gets flinched there. Trying to use other Pokemon that have this sort of matchup division type of quality, such as Machamp, such as Celebi on these structures. I think that it's really cool to see how these sort of things evolve so quickly as the metagame is living and breathing. I was going to say, unlike a certain document in a certain country's codified law, but let's not talk about that right now. Let's talk about how this Clefable has knocked off this Jirachi Choice Scarf. that is going to limit the ability of this Jirachi to check some of the faster things. I don't recall what's last on this team from our left side here, but should it be faster than Jirachi sans the Choice Scarf, we could have a lot of pressure onto the Jirachi. Look at that Wish Choice Scarf. Such innovation from Ray Scarface here. Many would not find such an interesting move option to put on their Scarf Jirachi. Now, let's think about, as well, other Pokemon that might be able to use Iron Head. Of course, Jirachi is going to be the main one, but you could see this on Pokemon such as Scizor or Steelix, who are a little bit underrepresented in the ADV metagame. In small part because one of their stab types is not super duper usable. In ADV, there's no Bullet Punch for Scizor, nor is there Technician, so it's not hitting quite as hard as its 130 attack stat would maybe have you believe. It has to rely on moves such as Silver Wind, which is only 60 base power, and of course a physical move in ADV, and hidden power coverage, and it's kind of split between whether it wants to use Rock or Ghost. It's kind of picking what you want to lose to, in a sense, right? If you don't have Rock, then you're struggling to hit Pokemon such as Zapdos, who is a massive threat, defensively speaking, especially nowadays as people are running more HP investment and SPDEF investment. Not that that matters so much for Scizor. To make it a really, really core defensive piece on a lot of structures, from stall to offense. It also will struggle to hit things like Aerodactyl, who sometimes is not going to die to a simple HP Ghost, despite the fact that it is a pretty frail Pokemon. It has just enough to live a lot of things that are nasty otherwise. And lost my train of thought for a second there. Oh yeah, Scizor. Yeah, so you don't really have any great Steel-type options for Scizor. You would appreciate to not have to dedicate your hidden power to it, if you could do such a thing. And that might make Scizor slightly more relevant, though I will say Scizor does have a lot of other issues, such as its speed not being quite good enough to be a late-game offensive sweeper, as well as simply just not having enough juice to really one-shot a lot of Pokemon from full, even with a +2 from Swords Dance. It's a little bit tragic, and Technician was a much-needed boost for it, as well as Bullet Punch. So I don't know if it would get much use. Steelix would be a little bit more interesting of a case. It's a Pokemon that oftentimes is relying on Mono Earthquake coverage, which can be very difficult to handle. Some of the Pokemon that you should be able to wall, in theory, like Aerodactyl. Instead, you end up having to kind of being forced to use Toxic as a means of hitting the Aerodactyl, which is not always going to work for you, because sometimes Aerodactyl will run Substitute plus Lychee Berry, or the more demonic sets like Sub and Protect with Pressure to eliminate your ability to click moves for very long, thanks to Pressure, which has since been implemented slightly differently from the spectator point of view, where it now gives you a range of possible PP options depending on how many moves have been clicked into a Pokemon that might have Pressure, Aerodactyl included. So it's kind of an interesting sort of change. I don't think it's not going to affect the gameplay so much, but it does affect the viewing experience as a spectator, which might help for commentators of ADV. Now, I mean, a good commentator is going to use the context clues of the game to sort of figure out how much PP a certain move might have. But I'm not going to complain about lowering the barrier to entry, especially in a time where it seems like the way to grow the sort of scene in competitive is to make content. That's why I'm doing that, right? To some degree. Of course, it's still for self-fulfillment. That's always been the number one. Like, you know, it's sort of like playing an instrument, right? Of course, you want somebody to hear your performance and you want to move them, but moving yourself is really what is the most important, in my opinion. If you're able to sort of connect deeply with your own craft, that is really, really what makes magic happen. It's the human experience, right? Trick the Choice Scarf onto Tyranitar. They might actually be bad for Latias, as Tyranitar might be able to transition into a more pursuit trapper-y role, but unfortunately the Tyranitar is not quite fast enough to outspeed the Latias, such as what we were talking about earlier with Ironhead Jirachi. You know, that's basically a +1 Tyranitar there. Easily, Jirachi could run enough speed to outspeed that and flinch it down and win regardless of the Dragon Dance boost. If you can even get the Dragon Dance off, that is. So, Steelix, yeah, having a move to hit Aerodactyl could be really, really nice. And one that's more consistent than Iron Tail, which is only 75% accurate. Some Pokemon get all the luck, like Metagross, right? 85% accurate on your 100 base power Steel type move, and a 20% chance to raise your attack versus the Iron Tail chance to raise defense. Now, that's not a bad effect, of course, but the 10% extra accuracy is definitely, excuse me, hiccuping here, missed on a Pokemon such as Steelix, who would otherwise like to have, you know, those attack boosts. But Ironhead, yeah, would be a nice and consistent option for Steelix. It wouldn't have to run Hidden Power Rock necessarily to hit all the things. Now, it still would struggle into Pokemon such as Zapdos, who tend to wall Steelix anyway. And look at that, the Claydol, faster than the Scarf Tyranitar. So interesting how the meta develops here, and how even in the course of a single game, we're seeing things change in real time. But there aren't so many other Pokemon that I would expect would use Ironhead that frequently. You could use it on Metagross, but why would you when you have such a powerful move in Meteor Mash? I mean, just look at DPP, for example. Ironhead is not very commonly used on Metagross, in no small part because the Meteor Mash threatening to raise attack, threatening to just secure Okos is fantastic. Like, you can't really pass that up. However, it's a possibility. Sometimes you may want that sort of level of consistency, and there's some value there, though not as much as I would probably recommend that you use it. And then as far as a coverage move goes, for Pokemon that are not Steel type, not getting that same type attack bonus, I doubt that there are very many Pokemon that I would actually use Ironhead, because you don't really hit very much for great super effective damage. Just rock types, which, I mean, if you have access to fighting type moves, generally tends to be better. Or if you have access to ground type moves, sometimes that could be better. The counterexample, of course, is Aerodactyl. And I suppose that if there are some Pokemon who are slotted to sort of be a Aerodactyl check, but they need a move that can threaten big damage on it, Iron Head may be used in that situation. I could also see Skarmory, Pokemon that does get stab on it, using Iron Head, avoiding having to use HP Steel, which is one, lowering your special defense IV, which can sometimes be annoying for Skarmory that are trying to optimize their speed without losing rolls versus opposing Magneton. It's a really interesting dynamic. If you have 248 HP, 248 Spadef with a plus Spadef nature, that gives you just as likely odds to live a Thunderbolt from Modest Magneton as Max does. So you can use that to bolster your speed just a little bit and perhaps get the jump on opposing Skarmory that don't try to do that, as well as defensive Metagross that are running low speed investment as it is. So that's an interesting sort of idea. I don't know how many of you knew about that. I'm sure you probably did, but just in case you didn't, there's a little bit of a tidbit of information for you. But yeah, so sometimes Skarmory will run Hidden Power Steel to handle BKC Tar, or such a gauche name for it. A bulky physical attacker is probably a more indicative name for what the set actually does and what its function is. So perhaps I'll prefer to use that as the term for it. But yeah, there's so much sort of interplay between Skarmory and Tyranitar that could change with the advent of Iron Head as an option for Skarmory. Could get a little bit more damage, can threaten those focus punching Tyranitar quite a bit. In fact, you might have enough juice there to break a substitute on the substitute variant of Tyranitar, so that could be worth it in and of itself. Finding new applications for these ideas in real time in this video, much like improvisational jazz. I did play quite a bit of jazz when I was in high school band. I don't know if I would go back and do it again. I had a lot of, let's say, friction between it and my emotional connection to the music and the pedagogical process by which my band director chose to conduct that class. Conduct kind of being a sort of pun, not necessarily intended, but there you go. So yeah, but I mean, jazz music is very fun. The improvisational aspect, of course, is just something that you don't get to often engage with in other forms of music. So I do appreciate that, though the ego that can sometimes creep into musicians as they're expressing themselves, in particular with the improvisational art form of many jazz sort of styles, can sometimes be just a bit much to contend with, and is part of the reason why I don't really play much jazz anymore. It's a little unfortunate when a community of people can sometimes be, how do I want to say, problematic for one's own enjoyment of the sort of community that is trying to be engaged with. So much like Mons, of course, I'm sure you've probably experienced this yourself, especially if you're in tournament settings, or if you're just trying to bounce ideas off of your fellow Pokemon players. Some people, they have too much of a sense of self-importance to really engage with ideas that are not their own, from all skill levels, of course. It's easy sometimes to blame higher skill players, musicians, for being elitist in a sort of sense and closed-minded due to that. But even low skill players are sometimes not receptive to sort of ideas that don't necessarily fit their neophyte understanding of the sort of medium that they're engaging with. Sometimes, you'll talk to somebody and they'll say, "Oh, I'm running into this problem." Like, for example, I just cannot handle Suicune very well with most of my teams. I often get swept by Suicune in a late game situation. You say, well, do you use Pokemon like Celebi, like Blissey, that can slow it down in the middle game? And then do you use like Explosion users that can stop Suicune from being able to comfortably set up in the late game? It's like, well, no, I don't use those. I don't like how slow a Pokemon such as Blissey or especially defensive Celebi plays. And I don't like killing off my Pokemon for the sake of stopping progress. It's like, well, I mean, if you're not engaging with those parts of the metagame, then why are you so shocked that you're losing to the things that you are choosing not to have the counters for, right? So that can definitely be the case in music as well, where you don't practice your pentatonic scales, for example. So that's why maybe your solos don't sound so natural, and you're not listening to great soloists in the jazz medium, of course. Players such as Charlie Parker, such as Cannonball Adderley, such as Miles Davis. These great names in the jazz sphere. You're not listening to their solos. Like, how do you expect to have more of your own ideas? Yes, you don't want to copy them per se, but like listening to what they do, you can glean some information about like what possibly could be an avenue for you to explore, the way that they contour their melodies, the times that they choose to play like densely with many sort of fast rhythms versus the times that they choose to have that more long introspective stuff where they put their rests. All of that really, really goes into like the sort of improving process of your own solo. So why are you not like engaging with that, right? Also, fantastic game. 153 turns. It was looking very dire for the left side here, but of course able to grind it down to a situation where the Gliscor was able to handle all of the Pokemon that it needed to handle. So very well done there. So some of you might be thinking about Jirachi in particular, Ironhead in particular, as a sort of negative force for the metagame. See, Body Slam already getting a paralysis immediately on this Metagross and then getting the flinches, and possibly going to flinch down the Metagross. Not very much that Sakito can do about this. Tricks an Iron Ball, but that might not be quite good enough for Metagross to survive this encounter. You might think that this is like just overall a bad addition to the metagame, and I think that there's some context by which that might be the case. Of course, we think about Aerodactyl and, to some extent, Dragon Dance Tyranitar as being forces of evil in the tier, as they're able to just flinch everything, since they're faster, since they're having that 30% chance to flinch, assuming they hit. Wow, look at that critical hit there. All of which is sometimes hard to play around. Yes, you can have your rock resist, but you're also going to have a steel resist for the Jirachi. How much can we put on Swampert to have to beat these Pokemon? Hold on. Yes, continue playing. I hate when YouTube does this. Why does it not just continue to play? I have the playlist going. Just play. Okay. At least we're not getting ads. That's a fortunate outcome here. But yes, like, we're introducing so much RNG to the game by having Ironhead, in particular on Jirachi. Like, is that something that could be healthy for the metagame? I tend to think probably not. There's already a lot of discourse in DPP. Look at that, Milotic there. Not a super duper common member of the the DPP metagame. And, well, it's showing why there. It's just a Hax Magnet. That's a Pokemon that I'm sure would get flinched out by Jirachi in ADV. Of course, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Milotic is definitely a good defensive piece and quality Pokemon to use if you need that sort of bulky water in both ADV and DPP. But I'd be remiss not to mention that, you know, the more sort of RNG elements that we put into the game, the less competitive it sort of feels. Now, there's always this sort of idea that really good Pokemon players are the ones that are able to mitigate the risk of hacks or RNG elements that are unfavorable. And yeah, like, it can be a little bit of a pain to introduce more of those elements, and for the sake of what, like, Jirachi gets a move that would unlock a more physical variant. There's plenty of innovation for physical Jirachis that can be had. The Choice Band Doom Desire set is quite interesting. But of course, there's like the mixed Jirachi sets as well that use Hidden Power Fighting, and a combination of good special attacking moves. So it's not like it's a non-existent thing in ADV, but it would, I guess, add a sort of dynamic there. Look at this Magnezone coming in on Metagross. Probably just going to rip the Thunderbolt and kill here. There we go. That was a Metagross that was thoroughly shellacked by the Jirachi. Kind of a awkward position for Sakito here. I wouldn't necessarily be in support of adding such a thing. Of course, this is purely hypothetical. We would never do such a thing in ADV. But if it did come to pass that Ironhead was allowed on Jirachi and ADV, so in this purely hypothetical, I think there's a good chance that it would get banned. Although, you know, as is the case in the DPP metagame, you know, there are always these elements of sort of RNG that exist. You know, to a degree, it's like, if you don't want there to be any RNG elements in a competitive Pokemon match, then, you know, perhaps you're playing the wrong game. You know, we don't want to be so callous as to suggest that, you know, there's no value in discussing what elements are acceptable versus which ones are a bit too much. You know, like things like Double Team and Minimize that exist only to decrease the ability of the opponent to effectively engage in a back and forth counterplay, are just not exactly what makes for a very fun competitive experience. Like, you know, I personally value when there is an element of interplay where we both have to make decisions about how to conduct the game going forward. And, you know, elements such as like this really high flinch chance from Jirachi could, in theory, be antithetical to that sort of playstyle. Now, of course, there's some counterplay to Jirachi, which is in part why it's not banned outright in DPP, such as things like, you know, you saw that trick Iron Ball Metagross. Paralysis onto Jirachi can sometimes be a deterrent, although there's plenty of counterplay to that, such as, say, like this Toxic Orb Breloom. This song has a terrible loop. Sorry, contest winner. We will be moving on to the next theme there. What was I talking about here? Maybe I'll go take a bathroom break and think about what it was that I meant to say. All right, I'm back. You know, sometimes... Wow, look at that struggling Latios there. Latias, excuse me. Why do they name two Pokemon so similarly to each other? It's difficult to sort of parse which one you're meaning to say in some cases. Though maybe that just might be a personal thing. And of course, I'm not going to cut out these breaks in between because that would be like inauthentic. You know, there's something to be said about these sort of, how should I say, creative process. And a part of the process, of course, as this Jirachi gets a double protect on the Dragonite, is allowing your authentic self to be expressed through the video form. And, you know, I really pride myself on being able to deliver that experience, as this Breloom also gets a double protect to beat out this Dragonite. So I am not going to be editing any of these breaks out. Not because I don't know how to do it. Of course, I'm something of a filmmaker, you might say. I mean, it's only YouTube videos right now, but who knows? Maybe, perhaps it could be much bigger than that at some point. Who's to say? You and I want you all to really experience the unfilteredness. Some people, they would make a Patreon or like member only videos that would give you that sort of experience and make you pay for it. And I'm not so interested in doing that right now. So I'm gonna allow you all to have that authentic experience as it is. But yeah, so there are some things, of course, that get banned, such as, for example, Frostlass in DPP has no place in the tier any longer due to the combination of its ability and its speed and certain move options that it has. Look at that critical hit on Clefable. This is such an interesting sort of lead here. Porygon Z, not a very commonly seen thing. Here comes the Nidoqueen, looking like a more defensive team from the opponent. And they're just going to die to a Ice Beam there, so I don't know if that was quite advisable. Hyper Beam, wow, okay. And here's the Frostlass here, who is using Substitute, of course, with its Snow Cloak ability and the Hail being up. It is able to dodge hits, and it's going to go for Mud Slap to lower accuracy. And look at what this thing does. Like, this is exactly the sort of idea behind, like, what might be worth banning. Like, this is a very uninteractive style of play. Now, you could say, well, there's counterplay for this, of course. You could reset the weather, and if Walt994 here had a Tyranitar, which is not a very difficult Pokemon to slot on a team, although it's a little unfair to say that you should have to slot Tyranitar on every team for the sake of resetting weather on this Frostlass. That would have countered this strategy to some extent. You get the Sand Up, and then you go to a Pokemon that is immune to Mud Slap. Then, of course, that would be an easy way to not lose so thoroughly to the Frostlass. But it's kind of insidious, too, because Hail is getting that chip damage on everything. If you don't have leftovers, you are just having to eat all of that damage. Even if you do have leftovers, then the Ice Beam / Mud Slap damage is sticking as an Ice Beam is coming down on that Swampert there. Earthquake manages to hit, but, like, yeah, this is kind of a... I mean, this is so uninteractive. Is this like fun even for the person using this mechanic to sort of like cheese a win in a sense? Now, of course, there are degrees to it. We talk about Jirachi as potentially being like a form of this. You don't even need to set up the Hail for it. And there's arguably less counterplay to Iron Head flinches, even though, yes, you could have a faster Pokemon. Yes, you could have Pokemon that do not take a ton of damage from Steel-type moves as a sort of measure of soft counterplay to the Jirachi. At the end of the day, Jirachi is still flipping matchups by virtue of one of the game mechanics, which is contentious, of course. Now, the issue, of course, being that Jirachi provides a lot of utility to the tier, right? Like, it's a really good switch into a Pokemon such as Latias, although Latias was not always in DPP, so maybe this is Jirachi is the solution to a problem that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And we could argue as well that, supposing that Jirachi gets banned, and we need to reorganize around what to do now that we've lost one of the kind of core components of the metagame. Of course, Jirachi is very consistently top 5 in usage throughout the history of DPP. We'll of course find other things to do, and if there's Pokemon such as Latias that become such an issue that they can't be handled anymore, then they'll get banned as well. That's a sort of avenue to go. But there's also to an extent the argument that, well, a lot of the players who, still play DPP, it's because they like the dynamic of the metagame, and it'd be a little unfair, especially for players who do not play DPP very much, whereas, like, take me, for example. I don't play DPP quite as much as, maybe I ought to be making sweeping claims about the state of the metagame. Like, there's just this, I don't know, this sort of element of, like, if people like it the way that it is, then why would you make changes to it? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, the adage goes. But I guess there's also the sort of argument as well that, well, maybe there are a lot of people that really do like a lot of the mechanics of DPP, but they really, really don't like what Ironhead Jirachi does to the tier, and they have decided to leave the metagame, no longer play it, because of what Ironhead Jirachi does to the tier. And there's sort of an interesting dynamic there, where, you do have to weigh, like, the people who have stuck it out and what they value versus the people who did not stick it out and what they value versus potential new players. Although I'm not so interested in making, like, these older metagames accommodating for new players. Like, if you like what you see, then come and play and learn what it is and enjoy the metagame in that way. But if you don't like what you see, then I don't know, just stick to one of the newer metagames or play something different. Like, not every tier necessarily has to cater to your specific tastes. Like, for example, RBY is a metagame where risk mitigation is really, like, the big thing with that metagame, and some players, they're just not built to handle that sort of responsibility. And, like, if you're not built for that, oh, look at that flamethrower miss right there. There's no light at the end of the tunnel for Walt here, who's kind of running a bogus team in and of himself, let's be real. Like, yeah, if you're not into that sort of dynamic, then you don't play RBY. Like, it doesn't, that's the great thing about Pokemon, is there's so many different metagames that there is something that probably appeals to your sensibilities. You just have to find that. You don't have to change something that doesn't, just for the sake of your own sort of, in a sense, selfish desires. Although I shouldn't say, I'm not gonna place so much animus into, or venom into, this hypothetical imagined scenario of what kind of player you are. I don't know you. It's maybe not fair for me to do such a thing. Let's continue here. So there are some things that maybe wouldn't make Jirachi as annoying, I guess, if we want to be reductive in a sense. Lolita as a nickname. Good movie, interesting read as a book, although definitely on the more, how should I say, intense side as far as the themes go. It's a really, I don't know if I would recommend it for everyone, but a unfortunately prescient sort of look into the mind of, let's face it, a criminal. As, yeah, those of you who know would know. There's not as much sort of annoyances with Jirachi, such as Fire Punch being a special move, so Jirachi's not going to be able to quite run as much attack investment in that sort of steel plus fire coverage that it tends to run in DPP. There's also no U-turn, so there's a little bit less of a mind game going on every time that Jirachi is on the field. U-turn, I mean, it's an interesting sort of dynamic. It's cool that it allows for certain play styles like this hit and run type of balance slash offense structure that we're kind of seeing from Honor's side of the field here. But it does make, I mean, it's another free click in competitive Pokemon, and I think there's probably some room to discuss that concept a little bit more. Look at that payback there, wow. What a move that could be really interesting in ADV, although I don't know how much use it would get because it would be a special move. Maybe that could be another video in and of itself. But free clicks in competitive Pokemon, really hard to come by, in particular in the older gens, especially ADV. Probably one of the freest clicks that you have is like Leech Seed, for example. It's really hard to switch into Leech Seed, and many of the Pokemon that would be taking a Leech Seed are not necessarily super duper threatening. Celebi back, in particular Celebi. There are some other Leech Seeders, of course, but Celebi, of course, is the most prominent. Wow. Critical hit Thunderbolt there. Lucario. Could be a Calm Mind Lucario. Let's see. It does not seem to be the case. Okay. So, not having that does make Jirachi a tad bit easier to deal with in a sense. And then, of course, Dugtrio still exists in ADV. So that could be a Pokemon that would have some factor of holding Jirachi in check. Though, I don't know if I like the idea necessarily of needing a Trapper as potent as Dugtrio to be the thing that answers what might potentially be broken in a Jirachi with Ironhead in ADV. It could be a little bit, you know, placing a nail in your wall with a sledgehammer, you know? It's not as precise as we perhaps would like for the metagame. And yeah, the sort of reduced options in ADV for steel resists is always going to be the main issue. But that's kind of about it for what I want to talk about. I hope you've come away with your own sort of conclusions here about maybe what a Ironhead Jirachi ADV might look like. And for those of you who are less acquainted with the DPP metagame, I've shown you some of this. Yes, Jirachi is affecting the games very, very profoundly in some of these matchups, but, you know, there are definitely some cases where it could be a matter of positioning and team building that could have altered the course of some of these games. It's also a matter of, like, how some of these teams have, in small doses, dealt with Jirachi. Look at this Rest Rotom taking the Jirachi to task here. It's doing quite a fantastic job of being a check. But, you know, that's the thing, is we don't have something like Rotom in ADV. So I don't think that Jirachi would be very healthy in the metagame if it had Ironhead in ADV. But I invite you to view the sort of topic in your own way. You know, don't just take my word for it. Like, have your own thoughts about this sort of thing. And let's just let this battle play out as I go and perhaps take another bathroom break.